The phone slipped from Grace Mitchell's trembling fingers as she stared at the man who had just asked her for the unthinkable. "You want me to what?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the cavernous marble hallway of the Stanton mansion. Richard Stanton, once the most feared billionaire on Wall Street, now sat hunched in his imported Italian wheelchair, his gaunt frame a shadow of the titan who had built a $30 billion empire. The oxygen tank beside him hissed softly, the only sound breaking the suffocating silence between them. "You heard me correctly, Grace," he said, his voice hoarse but determined. "After everything we've been through together, this is the one last favor I need from you." But what happened next shocked everyone who thought they knew the real Richard Stanton. Grace took 3 steps backward, her worn hands gripping the mahogany banister as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. For 23 years, she had cleaned these floors, polished these mirrors, and watched this man build his fortune. She had seen him at his highest peaks and his darkest moments. But she had never seen him look at her the way he was looking at her now, with desperate, pleading eyes that seemed to hold secrets she couldn't even begin to imagine. "Mr. Stanton," she began carefully, her southern accent thickening with emotion, "I've been loyal to you and this family for over 2 decades. But what you're asking me to do goes against everything you believe in." He finished her sentence, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Trust me, Grace. I know exactly what I'm asking." The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rugs that probably cost more than most people's houses. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears above them, reflecting the golden light across walls lined with priceless art collections. Every surface screamed of wealth, power, and success. Yet sitting in the middle of it all was a dying man who looked more alone than anyone Grace had ever seen. Little did Grace know that her answer to this request would uncover a web of secrets that had been buried for decades, secrets that would change everything she thought she knew about the man she had served so faithfully. "I need time to think," Grace said finally, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. Richard's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like relief. "That's all I'm asking for right now. Time to consider it." "But Grace..." He leaned forward in his wheelchair, his breathing labored. "Time is the one thing I don't have much of left." She nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The doctors had been clear, 3 months, maybe 4 if he was lucky. The cancer that had been silently growing inside him for years had finally made itself known, and it was winning. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything," Grace said quietly, turning to leave. "Grace, wait." She paused at the top of the marble staircase, her hand resting on the cool banister. "Do you ever regret staying here all these years? Never getting married, never having children of your own?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She stood there for a long moment, her back still turned to him, before finally looking over her shoulder. "Some choices we make aren't really choices at all, Mr. Stanton. They're just what we do when we love someone. This decision would change everything, though neither of them could have predicted just how dramatically their lives were about to transform." As Grace descended the staircase, her mind raced with memories and possibilities. Behind her, Richard watched her retreating figure with an expression of profound sadness mixed with hope. He knew he was asking the impossible. He knew he had no right to ask anything of her after everything that had happened between them, everything that had remained unspoken for so many years. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his chest, and Richard gasped, his hand clutching desperately at his heart. The wheelchair began to tip forward as his vision blurred and darkness crept in from the edges. But the real shock was still coming, because what Grace didn't know was that Richard's request wasn't just about dying peacefully. It was about a secret that could destroy everything she had ever believed about her life, her choices, and the man she had devoted herself to serving. Grace's hands trembled as she knelt beside Richard's collapsed form on the cold marble floor. His breathing came in shallow gasps, each one a reminder that time was slipping away like sand through her fingers. She'd seen him weak before, but never like this, never so fragile that a simple conversation could bring him to his knees. "Mr. Stanton, please," she whispered, helping him to the leather armchair near the fireplace. "Let me call Dr. Morrison." "No," Richard managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Not yet, Grace. We need to talk about what I asked you. The favor. Grace's stomach churned as she adjusted the cashmere throw around his shoulders. 23 years she'd worked in this mansion, and she'd never seen fear in Richard Stanton's eyes, not until today. But as she looked at him now, something else nagged at her. Something about the way he'd phrased his request earlier, the careful choice of words that felt almost calculated. Her mind drifted back to that autumn day in 1999 when she'd first walked through these gilded doors. She'd been 32 then, recently divorced, desperate for steady work to support her teenage daughter. Richard had been different, younger, more vibrant, but with the same penetrating stare that seemed to see straight through people's facades. "You have honest eyes," he'd told her during that interview, standing in this very room. "I need someone I can trust completely." Trust. The word felt heavy now, weighted with decades of shared secrets and silent observations. The phone's shrill ring jolted Grace from her memories. She glanced at Richard, who nodded weakly, and answered with her usual professional tone. "Stanton residence." "Grace, it's Charles Hawthorne." "I heard Richard took a turn for the worse." "How is he?" Grace's grip tightened on the receiver. Charles Hawthorne, Richard's former business partner, current rival, and the man who'd been circling like a vulture ever since news of Richard's illness broke. She glanced at Richard, whose eyes had narrowed at the mention of Charles's name. "Mr. Stanton is resting comfortably," she replied carefully. "I see. Well, please give him my regards." "And Grace?" Charles's voice dropped to barely audible. "Remember what we discussed. Some favors are more dangerous than they appear." The line went dead, leaving Grace staring at the phone in confusion. What we discussed? She'd spoken to Charles exactly once in all her years here, and that was merely to take a message. Her pulse quickened as fragments of that brief interaction came flooding back, Charles stopping by unannounced 3 weeks ago, his casual questions about Richard's daily routine, his odd comment about loyalty having its limits. "Who was that?" Richard asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "Charles Hawthorne. He was asking about your health." Grace set the phone down, her voice steadier than she felt. "Richard, what exactly is this favor you need from me?" Richard's eyes closed, and for a moment, Grace thought he might have fallen asleep. Then he spoke, his words careful and measured. "There are things about my past, Grace. Decisions I made that hurt people. Good people. The favor I'm asking, it's about making things right before I go." Before Grace could respond, she noticed something white poking out from beneath the antique Chinese vase on the side table, something that definitely hadn't been there that morning. Her heart hammered as she discreetly retrieved what appeared to be a folded note, the paper expensive and cream-colored. She waited until Richard dozed off before unfolding it, and the words made her blood run cold. "The dying man's final game has already begun. Trust no one, especially him. Meet me at midnight if you want the truth. A friend." Grace stared at the note, her comfortable world tilting on its axis. A game? 23 years of loyalty, of thinking she knew the man she'd devoted her life to serving, and now this cryptic warning suggested everything might be an elaborate deception. She looked at Richard's sleeping form, noting for the first time how his breathing seemed less labored now, how his color had improved since his dramatic collapse. Had she imagined the calculation in his earlier request? The way his eyes had flickered with something that looked almost like anticipation when he'd asked for that mysterious favor? The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 6 times, its deep resonance echoing through the mansion's empty halls. Richard stirred, opening his eyes to find Grace watching him with an expression he'd never seen before, wariness mixed with something that looked dangerously close to suspicion. "Grace," he said softly, "about that favor. I need your answer soon. Tonight, actually." She folded the note carefully, slipping it into her apron pocket where it felt like a burning coal against her hip. "What exactly happens at midnight, Richard?" The silence in Richard's study feels suffocating as Grace stands frozen by the mahogany desk, her fingers still trembling from reading the cryptic note. Richard watches her carefully, his sunken eyes searching her face for answers she's not ready to give. "Grace, we need to talk about what I asked you to do," Richard says, his voice barely above a whisper. The oxygen tank beside his chair hisses softly, a constant reminder of time slipping away. She turns to face him, the note crumpled in her palm. "Mr. Stanton, before I can help you with anything, I need to understand something. That phone call from Charles Hawthorne today, and now this warning." She holds up the paper. "What aren't you telling me?" Richard's facade crumbles slightly. "Sit down, Grace. Please." As she settles into the leather chair across from him, Richard begins to speak, his words heavy with regret. 32 years ago, when I hired you, it wasn't by accident. I knew who you were. I knew about your father." Grace's breath catches. "My father? He died when I was 16. You said you never knew him." "I lied." Richard closes his eyes, as if the admission physically pains him. "Your father, Thomas Mitchell, worked for my company. He discovered some financial irregularities in our overseas operations. Money that was supposed to go to worker safety programs was being redirected." The room seems to spin around Grace. She grips the chair arms, her knuckles white. "You're saying my father found out you were stealing?" "Not me directly, but my business partner at the time. I should have listened to your father's concerns, but I was young and ambitious. I chose to protect the company's reputation instead." Richard's voice breaks. The stress of being discredited, of losing his job and facing legal threats he couldn't afford to fight, it contributed to his heart attack. Grace stands abruptly, pacing to the window overlooking the manicured gardens. The irony isn't lost on her. She's spent over 3 decades caring for the man whose decisions may have killed her father. "Why did you hire me then?" "Guilt?" "Initially, yes. But Grace, you became like family to me. The daughter I never had with my own son." The mention of David makes Grace turn back. "Speaking of David, when was the last time you actually spoke to him? Not through lawyers or assistants, but really talked?" Richard looks away. 7 years ago. At his mother's funeral." "And what did you say to him?" "I told him he was weak. That he'd never amount to anything without the family name." The admission hangs in the air like a toxic cloud. Grace shakes her head, understanding dawning. "The favor you want isn't about your will or your money, is it? You want me to help you reach out to David." Before Richard can answer, his breathing becomes labored. Grace rushes to his side, adjusting his oxygen mask. "We should call Dr. Morrison." "No," Richard gasps between breaths. "There's something else. Something you need to see first." He points toward the ceiling with a shaky finger. "The attic. There's a trunk up there with your father's things. Things I should have given you years ago." Grace stares at him, torn between anger and compassion. This man has been both her savior and her father's destroyer. "Mr. Stanton, I don't know if I can do this. After everything you've just told me." "Please, Grace. I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm running out of time to make things right." Against her better judgment, Grace finds herself climbing the narrow stairs to the mansion's attic 20 minutes later. Dust motes dance in the afternoon light streaming through a small window. In the corner sits an old steamer trunk, locked but with a key taped to its side. Inside, she finds folders of documents in her father's neat handwriting, photographs of him as a young engineer, and letters addressed to various government agencies that were never sent. But it's the manila envelope at the bottom that stops her cold. The envelope contains copies of financial records, bank statements, and a letter her father had written but never sent to her. In it, he explains his discovery of the safety fund diversions and his plans to expose the truth, no matter the cost. He writes about his love for his daughter and his hope that she'll understand why he has to take this stand. Tears blur Grace's vision as she realizes her father wasn't just a whistleblower, he was a hero willing to sacrifice everything for what was right. And Richard Stanton, the man she's cared for all these years, was complicit in silencing him. She carefully places everything back in the trunk except for one item, a small jewelry box she hadn't noticed before. Inside is her mother's engagement ring, the one that was supposedly lost when her father died. A note in Richard's handwriting explains that he bought it from a pawn shop after her father had to sell it to pay for legal fees. Grace clutches the ring to her chest, overwhelmed by a tsunami of emotions. Downstairs, she hears the front door chime echo through the mansion, followed by unfamiliar voices and heavy footsteps. As she makes her way back down, she freezes at the top of the main staircase. Standing in the foyer, travel bag in hand and looking around with a mixture of disgust and nostalgia, is a man she recognizes from old photographs but has never met in person. David Stanton has come home. Grace holds the dusty photograph in her trembling hands, staring at the face of the young woman Richard had promised to marry 35 years ago, her sister, Sarah. The woman he abandoned when his first business deal required him to marry a senator's daughter instead. The woman who died alone, heartbroken, never knowing that Grace had been working in this very mansion, watching Richard build his empire on the foundation of broken promises. "You knew," Richard's voice cuts through the silence like a blade. He's standing in the doorway of the attic, pale and shaking but somehow stronger than he's looked in weeks. "You've always known who I really am." Grace turns slowly, the photograph still clutched against her chest. "Sarah never stopped loving you," she whispers. "She died believing you'd come back to her. 3 years I watched her waste away, and 3 years I've worked in your house, serving the man who killed my sister's heart." Richard stumbles forward, his hand reaching for the wall to steady himself. "Grace, don't." Her voice cracks with decades of suppressed pain. "Don't you dare try to explain it away. You chose money over love. You chose power over promises. And now, when death is knocking at your door, you want me to help you feel better about the choices you made?" The billionaire's legs give out, and he collapses to his knees on the dusty attic floor. For the first time in 30 years, tears stream down his weathered face. "She was everything to me," he chokes out. "But the business deal, my father said if I didn't marry Margaret Caldwell, we'd lose everything. I thought I was being practical. I thought. You thought your money was more important than my sister's life." Grace's composure finally cracks completely. "Do you know what she did, Richard? Do you know what happened after you sent that letter saying you couldn't marry her?" But before Richard can answer, the sound of car doors slamming echoes from outside. Grace freezes, listening to footsteps on the front walkway, footsteps she hasn't heard in this house for over a decade. "Who could that be?" Richard asks, struggling to pull himself upright. Grace moves to the small attic window and peers down at the circular driveway. Her breath catches in her throat. Standing beside a black sedan, looking older but unmistakably familiar, is David Stanton, Richard's estranged son. The son who swore he'd never set foot in this house again after their explosive confrontation 10 years ago. "It's David," she whispers, and Richard's face goes white as snow. "David? My David?" Richard grabs the attic railing, hauling himself to his feet. I haven't spoken to him since. Since you chose your business over his mother's funeral," Grace finishes coldly. "Since you missed Margaret's burial because you had that merger meeting in Tokyo." The front door chimes echo through the mansion, but neither of them moves. 30 years of secrets hang in the air between them, thick as the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Below, David's voice calls out, uncertain but determined. "Dad? Are you here?" I heard you were sick." Richard looks at Grace with desperate eyes. "This is why I asked for your help," he says quickly, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is the favor I need. It's not about forgiveness for me, it's about making things right with David before it's too late. And with Sarah's memory. With you." Grace stares at him, her mind reeling. After all these years of hatred, of serving the man who destroyed her family while plotting her revenge, she never expected this. She never expected him to know the truth, to accept responsibility, to ask for help in healing the very wounds he'd created. "Grace?" David's voice is closer now, coming from the main hallway. Grace, are you here? She looks down at the photograph of her sister one more time, then back at Richard's pleading face. You want me to help you face your son? After everything you've done? I want you to help me become the man Sarah deserved, he whispers. The father David needed. It's too late for them to forgive me, but maybe it's not too late for them to forgive each other. The footsteps stop directly beneath the attic. David has found them. The silence in the mansion feels deafening as David stands frozen in the doorway, his eyes locked on his father's frail form. 23 years of anger and resentment hang in the air between them like a thick fog. Grace watches from the corner, her heart pounding as she realizes this moment, this confrontation between father and son, this is the favor Richard asked of her. You called him, Richard whispers, his voice barely audible as understanding washes over his weathered face. The favor wasn't about money or business deals. You called David. Grace steps forward, her hands trembling slightly as she nods. You said you wanted to make things right before it was too late, Mr. Stanton. But you've been too proud to reach out yourself. So I did what you couldn't. David's jaw clenches, and for a moment it looks like he might turn and leave. 23 years, Dad. 23 years of nothing. Not a call, not a letter, not even when Mom died. His voice cracks on the last word, revealing the pain he's carried all these years. Richard struggles to sit up straighter, his eyes filling with tears. I know, son. I know I failed you. I failed your mother. I was so consumed with building an empire that I forgot about building a family. He pauses, gasping slightly. Your mother, she tried to tell me. She said success without love was just decorated emptiness. I didn't listen. She waited for you, David says, his voice breaking. Even at the end, she kept asking if you'd come to see her. I had to lie and say you were on your way. The weight of these words hits Richard like a physical blow. He doubles over, not from his illness but from the crushing guilt. Grace moves to his side, her hand gently touching his shoulder, offering the only comfort she can. I can't undo the past, Richard says, tears streaming down his face. But I need you to know something, David. Everything I built, every dollar I earned, none of it matters now. The only thing that matters is sitting right here in this room, and I almost let it slip away forever. David's resolve begins to crumble. The anger he's held onto for so long suddenly feels exhausting. Why now, Dad? Why when you're dying? Because Grace made me realize something, Richard replies, looking at the woman who has shown him more loyalty and wisdom than he ever deserved. She's been trying to tell me for months. She kept leaving your pictures where I'd see them, mentioning stories about families reconciling. She never gave up on us, even when I had given up on myself. Grace wipes her own tears as she speaks. I watched your father every day, David. I saw him stare at your photographs when he thought no one was looking. I heard him practicing conversations with you in his study. He was just too scared of your rejection to actually make the call. David takes a hesitant step closer to his father's bedside. I used to dream you'd call. Every birthday, every Christmas, I'd hope. I wrote you letters, Richard admits. Hundreds of them. They're all in my desk upstairs. I just never had the courage to send them. The dam finally breaks. David rushes to his father's side, and they embrace for the first time in over 2 decades. Both men are sobbing now, years of pain and regret pouring out in that single moment of connection. I'm sorry, Richard whispers into his son's shoulder. I'm so sorry for everything. I forgive you, Dad, David replies, his voice muffled but clear. I forgive you. Grace quietly slips from the room, knowing this moment belongs to them. As she closes the door behind her, she hears Richard's voice, stronger now than it's been in months. Tell me about your life, son. Tell me about your children, my grandchildren I've never met. Tell me everything. 3 hours later, Grace finds them still talking, David showing his father pictures on his phone of 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl who have their grandfather's eyes. Richard's face glows with a light she hasn't seen in years. Over the following days, something miraculous happens. David brings his family to the mansion. Richard gets to hold his grandchildren, to hear them laugh in the halls that have been silent for too long. He teaches his grandson to play chess and listens to his granddaughter read him stories. On Richard's final day, as he lies peacefully in his bed surrounded by his newfound family, he takes Grace's hand. "Thank you," he whispers. "You gave me the greatest gift anyone could give, a second chance at love." Grace squeezes his hand gently. "You always had love, Mr. Stanton. You just needed to let it in." As Richard closes his eyes for the last time, his face bears an expression of complete peace. The billionaire who had spent his life accumulating wealth had finally discovered something far more valuable, the love of his family and the knowledge that he would be remembered not for his money, but for the relationships he chose to heal. In his will, Richard left most of his fortune to charity, but his greatest bequest was the letter he wrote to Grace, "To the woman who saved my soul, thank you for teaching me that the richest man is not the one who has the most, but the one who needs the least. You showed me that love, forgiveness, and human connection are the only currencies that truly matter. Sometimes the greatest favor we can do for someone isn't giving them what they want, it's giving them what they need to become who they were meant to be."